Due to popular demand, I have to make this video. I've gotten countless comments begging for it, and I finally made it. Just kidding, only one person commented about wanting it. But now I just love them more than all of you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So let's start this video. The world of Dragon's Dogma is a setting not too different from that of Tolkien's Middle-earth, and as an enjoyer of both, I love to see it. The Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth as a whole has served as inspiration for many fantasy worlds, and Dragon's Dogma is no different. The creative director has even said in an interview how much he liked the series, and was a direct inspiration for some of the things in the game. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. From monsters to locations and everything in between, we'll be covering the inspirations that Dragon's Dogma used to craft its world. And just for reference, I'll only be talking about the movies, as I haven't read the books. But with that being said, I'm going to split this video up into two sections. Firstly, references and inspirations that are almost undeniable. And secondly, things I think are possible as a reference or bear a similarity, but aren't as compelling. So let's get into it, with our first section, shall we? Almost certain. Elves and the Sacred Arbor. I'm going to start with probably the easiest to recognize inspiration, and that would have to be the elves and their domain. Just at a glance, you can see many similarities in the architecture and general way of life of the elves. That being a very nature-centric way of life, traditional and peaceful. And both are hidden away in the wilderness, adding to their elusive and rare characteristics. But moving on from that, we have the father and son duo of Glyndwr and Taliesin, which almost perfectly mirrors Legolas and his father Thranduil. Especially Legolas and Glyndwr. They are both young elf men who are proficient in the art of archery, although Glyndwr isn't at first, while Legolas is seen as a master immediately upon introduction. And as for Taliesin, he is the arborist of the Sacred Arbor, essentially the settlement's leader, similar to the role Thranduil plays in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And I think Dragon's Dogma 2 does a good job at using these elves as inspiration while keeping the dynamic fresh, as Glyndwr and Taliesin have a strong, positive relationship, while Legolas and Thranduil do not, due to the death of Legolas' mother. I much prefer the dynamic of Glyndwr and Taliesin, if I'm being honest. It's nice to see a family dynamic that doesn't revolve around hatred. Monsters. To find enemies that take inspiration from Lord of the Rings, you need not look further than the very first non-dragon enemy you probably encountered in the series, the Goblin. The Goblin factions are very similar to that of the Orcs, and actually in Middle-earth, Goblin and Orc are used interchangeably. But even more so than the name, you can find similarities in the weapons they use, the way they're born, and to a lesser degree, their appearance. They even have a mission in the first game that heavily resembles a siege from any of the Lord of the Rings movies. They even have Cyclopes taking place of what should be trolls. And in relation to the orcs from Lord of the Rings, we have the wargs and garms. Now the goblins don't use wargs and garms in DD2, but just having them in the game can be considered a reference, due to Tolkien popularizing the monster. Lastly, for the monsters are the Ents from Online. They may as well have been taken straight out of Middle-earth appearance-wise, but they are enemies in this game, unlike in Lord of the Rings. Elves and Dwarves hatred. Turning to the non-monster side of things for a moment, we have the Elves and Dwarf rivalry. It plays a major role in the Hobbit trilogy, and it seems Dragon's Dogma 2 took note of this.
I will be dead before I see the ring in the hands of an elf!
As the dwarves and elves in Vermund and Batal seem to have a natural disliking of each other.
You'll never believe this, but the other day I saw an elven woman and a dwarven man walking hand in hand. Normally you put an elf and a dwarf in the same room and they'll be trading blows before you can blink. Mayhap my eyes deceived me.
This is likely due to the way of life and beliefs of both races. Sadly, we aren't shown much of the dwarven lifestyle in DD2, so we can't make any solid conclusions. Dragon's Plague / Dragon Sickness. Now for my favorite comparison on this list, the Dragon Sickness and Dragon's Plague. It's probably the one that I can safely say was inspired by Middle-earth the most, as the Battle of Five Armies came out a couple years after the first Dragon's Dogma game. And although the Hobbit books are much older, it's safe to say that the movies definitely popularized the Lord of the Rings. But let's get into the comparison. And note that Dragon Sickness isn't actually a sickness like a cold, but more of a mindset. So firstly, both are caused by something in relation to a dragon. In The Hobbit, it is a dragon's gold hoard that most commonly causes it, and in DD2, the spell of a dragon. Secondly, they both cause the host to take on characteristics of a dragon. In The Hobbit, it would be the greed of a dragon, and in DD2, it quite literally turns a pawn into one. And lastly, it's just the name, Sickness and Plague. It's as close to Dragon Sickness as you can get while still being its own name. I think it's a pretty cool reference and it's really appreciated. Balrog Moniker. While naming your character, you can find the moniker of Balrog. Balrogs are the large demon fire creatures in Lord of the Rings. You may recognize one from the "You Shall Not Pass" scene in the first movie. Out of all the names from Lord of the Rings, this was the only moniker I could find, sadly. Besides common names like Sam. Salamet and the Ring Greed. Salamet is a sorcerer from the first Dragon's Dogma game. He is the main antagonist of the questline Worm King's Ring, where you must find and retrieve the ring by the same name. What makes this interestingly similar to Lord of the Rings is the fascination that Salamet has with the ring and the power it gives him. Very similar to all that come into possession of the One Ring. The one seen throughout the movies. This power ultimately drives them to fiercely defend the ring and in turn the power it gives them. King being possessed. And finally we have the king possession from the Lord of the Rings in DD1. Both kings were under a sort of trance at some point, and both have a nasty yucky form and a normal form. In the Duke's case, he got from young to old, and Theoden goes from old to youngish. But in terms of why the Duke went crazy and choked out his lolly, it is never explained. While in Lord of the Rings it is due to a natural cause or potentially being poisoned by Grima. Could that ugly little jester fuck have poisoned the Duke? Either way, he's a little turd muffin. I hate that stupid jester. I'll never forgive him for making me look like a dumbass clown. I'm gonna fuck! But I just thought it was fitting to mention how both stories have a crazy king. And it seems Itsuno wanted to add this just because he thought a mad king was cool. So cool he did it twice actually. Duke Edmund and the mad sovereign Rothias. Possible references. Now we get into ones I can't say for certain are based on something in Lord of the Rings, but are so close it's hard to ignore them. Empyrean spell. Very minor here, but the spell Empyrean is quite similar to the spell Gandalf uses to dispel the Nazgul. The spell Empyrean is a holy spell that inflicts damage to any undead or ghost caught in the light, and it seems that Gandalf's spell acts quite similarly to this. Although I couldn't find any conclusive evidence that the Nazgul are undead, it would seem that they are based on what I read, making this an even closer depiction of this light spell. Soul Flayer Canyon. There's a giant area called the Soul Flayer Canyon in DD1, northwest of Grand Soren. It bears a strong resemblance to the mines of Moria in the first Lord of the Rings movie. It's expansive and multi-layered, just like in the movie. There is even a Cyclops in there, which again could be used as a reference to a cave troll we see in the movie. Strider Aragorn. Simply put for this section, but the character Aragorn from Lord of the Rings is also referred to as Strider. I could imagine Itsuno thought it would make for a cool vacation name. Never shown dwarf women. And last but not least, both Dragon's Dogma 2 and The Lord of the Rings both include a number of dwarven characters. But one thing neither included is the dwarven women. Where are those bearded beauties? We never even see one, and it's a shame. I can picture them now, carrying their husbands in after a long day of mining for mithril. What a sight to behold. Maybe in the next game or DLC, the developers will give us what we all want.
With little hairy women.
Now I bet these aren't all the things in Dragon's Dogma 2 and 1 that have roots in Lord of the Rings, but I thought these were pretty interesting, and I hope you did too. Feel free to comment any you found or that I missed. I'd love to hear more. But that is going to do it for now. So... bye-bye!